Doctors of Reddit, what are some of your anti-vax parent stories? Folks, if you're wondering why so many comments have been removed in this thread, it's because these comments were posted by what we call sock puppets, accounts that are created solely for karma-farming accounts selling by stealing other users' comments. We remove the comments and ban the accounts as we find them. Not a doctor, but a story I heard stuck with me. The head of pediatrics from a Toronto hospital, I forgot which one, was giving a talk and told a story about how, early in her practice, she had a little boy in for his scheduled vaccines, and was answering the nervous mother's questions. The mother planned to go ahead with the vaccines, but had heard lots of anti-vax propaganda, and so she was worried and had lots of questions. While they were talking, but before they administered the vaccines, the poor little kid suffered a grand mal seizure. It was really bad. The kid ended up getting admitted to the hospital and suffered a fairly serious brain injury. It occurred to the pediatrician much later that if that seizure had hit 10 minutes later, or if the appointment had been 10 minutes earlier, nothing would have ever convinced that poor mother that it wasn't the vaccine that caused the seizure. Had a kid come in for generic upper respiratory virus. Asked mom if he was vaccinated, as is routine. She said no. When I asked why not, her response was, well, my boyfriend was vaccinated and he's still got meningitis, so they don't even work. I told her that's the same as saying your friend got bruised by a seatbelt in a car accident, so you don't wear them when you drive. We had a 14-year-old female come in for abdominal pain one time. She weighed 80 pounds, looked sickly. Her mother refused to let her eat anything but a handful of things, nothing with very much protein at all. She literally had a binder full of articles about how horrible vaccines are, all the bad things they put in food these days, etc. She had completely brainwashed this kid, so the kid believed it too. Her labs showed malnutrition, her teeth were horrible, just a sad case all around. Curious if the mother was on the same diet. Bet not. Had a 5 or 6 years old patient who had a super hippie mom. No reason for not vaccinating other than she doesn't want to despite counseling many times. Kid also had asthma and would consistently come in for exacerbations despite prescribing appropriate controller meds. The amount of exacerbations just didn't make sense. One day, I sent my student to see him first while I called the pharmacy to see if his meds were received. The student came back saying I can't get a history from mom. She's literally falling asleep while talking to me. Also, pharmacy said the meds haven't been picked up from the last 3 visits. That was enough for me to call CPS. Mom was on drugs. Living situation deplorable. Last I heard, kid was moved to an aunt who caught him up with age-appropriate vaccines. That poor kid. Thank you for helping him out of that situation. I had asthma horribly as a child and can't imagine not getting my meds. When I was a med student, I had a parent who wanted to do a delayed vaccination schedule. Basically it means that you get all the same vaccinations but you pointlessly and foolishly do it over a longer time period. The mom had read a book promoting this practice that was unfortunately written by an MD. My pediatric attending had zero chill. Is that the book written by Dr. ? Yes, well, then you should know that I was in the same medical school class as Doctor, but I got much better scores than he did. Dang, that's freaking savage. I would have loved to see it. Not a doctor but so, significant other, works with children that have autism. She has one parent that consistently tells her she regrets vaccinating her kid. She then asks questions to my so about which vaccines are the ones that cause autism as if it's a big secret. My so tells her that autism is predetermined before birth and signs just aren't noticeable until around 2 years of age. She still tries to justify her logic with other anti-vax parents' stories from FB. My so has 2 master's degrees towards this field. It blows my mind how they can still argue with overwhelming facts. It's so sad to me that there's so much prejudice against people with autism that parents would rather risk their children dying from preventable diseases. I know it can be an immense challenge, but I also know a lot of awesome folks with autism leading relatively normal lives. I'm not a doctor, but an RN in public health. I recently had a mother call me to ask me if it was a smart idea for her child should get the MMR vaccine. Why was she asking this? She was worried that would make his autism worse. Nearly qualified pharmacist here. So obligatory, not a doctor. Our pharmacy offers travel vaccines for people going away to countries with a high likelihood of severe tropical disease. Star parenting goes to the parents who got themselves vaccinated for rabies, but not their two primary school age, elementary, for non-Brits, children. In medical school I saw a kiddo whose parents refused vaccines, and so when they were given the vaccine refusal form to sign, this form essentially said that the parents understood that refusing vaccines was against medical advice, that their kiddo could get sick from all those preventable diseases, and that they wouldn't hold the doctor practice liable for any complications that the kiddo may get from said preventable diseases. This mom pulled out a Sharpie and blacked out the part about the doctor not being held liable. The parents thought that we'd be cool with them just changing that form just for them, and they wanted the doctor to be held liable for their moronic choice. Of course this didn't work, and they were told to sign the form or they would be discharged from the practice and have to find another. They refused to sign and were told to leave after given a list of other pediatricians in the area. Med school student here. I was getting my hair cut and I was talking to the barber about how more people should get the new meningitis B vaccine, since I know a person who got meningitis B and almost died. The desk lady went off about how vaccines are dangerous, and pretty much every single anti-vax talking point. I explained the actual facts behind vaccines and said that I'm studying medicine. I think I might know what I'm talking about, and then she went off about professors not knowing what they are talking about and that they just teach what they are told to teach so that we can all be brainwashed into supporting the big pharmaceutical companies, and that my proof were all fabricated by them. Not a doctor, but a nurse and a vaccine advocate. Once had a public argument with a friend from long ago. He argued that by not vaccinating his kids and risking terrible side effects and possible autism, he was placing no one else at risk, however acknowledged the potential risk to his kids. After attempting to explain the potential risk to others and him failing to understand, I created an analogy which I still use to this day. Imagine if my kids and your kids get into the same car. Both of your kids don't put on seatbelts. Therefore, if there is an accident, there is an increased risk that your kids will die and also harm my children in the process. This seemed to click with him and he doesn't share his anti-vax propaganda on social media anymore. Good analogy. It's like not wearing your seatbelt because you're worried you could get trapped in your car after an accident. It's astronomically more likely you will be killed in an accident. But hey, at least you have avoided the minuscule risk of being trapped in a burning car by your seatbelt. Not directly related to my being a doctor, but a mutual friend of mine and my wife's is a chiropractor and anti-vaxxer, refused to vaccinate her first two kids. I didn't want her or her kids coming anywhere near our place when we had newborns or kids. 2 because of the risk her unvaccinated kids placed on my partially vaccinated babies. She got all offended saying the usual rubbish like if vaccines work, what do your kids have to fear, and your kids are more risk to mine because they'll be shedding viruses. Her third child was born with cystic fibrosis, which makes them very susceptible to all forms of respiratory and airborne infectious diseases. Suddenly the whole hypocritical family is vaccinated against everything. Well, at least they were able to change to protect their vulnerable child. It could be worse, they could have dug in and endangered their youngest. Not a doctor, but I worked at a children's hospital in research. At the time as a coordinator, a bunch of us were sitting in our office space talking about medical care of some sort casually. I think maybe flu vaccines. And one coordinator cuts in. Well, I don't know if you've seen the recent research, but there are a number of issues with vaccines that make them unsafe. They are highly correlated with autism. The room got quiet because everyone was polite. One person said, "Oh, I heard that, I think," in an effort to not alienate the girl. I responded, "That's not true because I couldn't not say that." She said, "Yeah, I'll send you the link." I said, "I think I've probably read the study. It's been rescinded." Then it got more awkward. This was probably 2017. I just couldn't believe that in 2017, a person whose job it is to understand research at a hospital with children can fall victim to bad research that has not been supported by any reputable source since probably the 90s. I'll tell a different kind of story. I am in a doc and recently had this interaction with a patient. Adult male comes in with fever. He comes back positive for the flu. Me, "You have the flu." I will write you for a prescription for Tamiflu. Patient. Doesn't that cause autism? This guy couldn't even remember that it was vaccines that reportedly cause autism. And he couldn't remember that it wasn't the flu vaccine. And of course he is wrong about vaccines causing autism. And he is a grown butt adult that thinks he will suddenly be autistic. Tamiflu doesn't cause autism, just causes empty wallet. Source. Had to take it once. I'm not a medical doctor but a mental health therapist. Went to do a new client intake and while asking the mother about the kid's medical history, vaccination records etc, she said he was not vaccinated because vaccines cause autism and she didn't want to risk her son getting it. Then when I went to meet the kid, within 5 seconds of laying eyes on him I could tell he was autistic. Worst part was that when I told her, she became very upset and started yelling at her husband saying he must have gotten the kid secretly vaccinated, and then immediately ran out the house and took the kid to the emergency room for testing and just left me and the dad in the living room just kind of staring at each other. Never answered my calls or texts again after that and I had to get DCF involved. Not a doctor, but my former primary care doctor was a crazy anti-vaxxer. He told me I didn't need the meningitis vaccine because no one gets it anymore. Freshman year I woke up in my dorm and couldn't move any of my limbs. My roommate took me to the ER and I tested positive for it. I ended up staying in the hospital for 3 weeks and I'm lucky to be alive. The doctor is thankfully not practicing anymore. Met an anti-vax GP who told me that Gardasil causes early menopause lol. Pediatric resident here in the US. Our continuity clinic accepts everyone, including those kicked out of previous practices for anti-vaccination beliefs, which is a bit frustrating at times. Really, it's a mixed bag for how we can handle these patients. Ostracizing the parents is only going to build further barriers between provider and kid, so that doesn't help. Frankly, what has worked best in my experience is to try to understand where the families are coming from. Explicitly asking what their thoughts are on vaccines to let them voice their misunderstandings. Oftentimes, this is the first time they've been allowed to talk about their questions and concerns regarding vaccines with a trained MD that doesn't just belittle them. Most frustratingly, it takes patience and time, assessing where they are regarding change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, etc. helps determine where we are for vaccinating them today, in a month, or in a few months. One thing that I do draw the line on is to make sure that we see these kids more frequently than normal children, as they are at higher risks for illnesses because they are not vaccinated. No room for negotiation on that point. This helps twofold. First, it helps build rapport with the family, but also secondly, if they decide to take a delayed schedule, which is still not ideal, but better than no vaccines, we can eventually catch them up to speed with their vaccinations by frequent return visits. Interestingly, it's always the yoga pants Karen types that are the anti-vaxxer, or pro-measles as I've been calling them lately, rather than the less educated single moms on welfare or the recent immigrants that speak no English. Ultimately, we're the kids' docs and their advocates, and are most effective when we ally with the families, or better put, get the families to ally with us, and do have to be stern after a certain point. It's a mix of being stern, but also compromising to work with families to provide their kids as much and the best, data-supported, care as possible. I really think an approach you suggest is the best way to handle anti-vaxxers. By building their trust over time, it allows you to dispel the myths, and that is much needed these days. Keep doing the good work. I feel like Family Guy said it best. There's an episode where Lois and Peter kidnap this child to get him to a hospital because the parents believe prayer will heal their kid. So Lois eventually has to confront them and says something like, maybe the vaccines and medicines are God's answer to your prayers. So why keep praying if you're going to wipe your butt? With his reply. When I was a medical student, I had a 5-year-old patient who looked and acted like a 2-year-old. Failure to thrive. His mother was super weird. She shaved the sides of his head, somehow like a marine cut, but kept his back hair long. She refused to vaccinate him or even feed him certain foods. Her sister and her husband were trying to get custody of the child because his mother was weird and didn't take care of him properly. I suspect she was paranoid. She would literally fight and call you names if you attempt to suggest to put the kid on a proper hospital diet. She wanted to inspect the food first and make sure he eats only certain things. Long story short, the attending calling county and they took the child away from her. Good, holy crap, that neglectfulness and frankly abuse would have severely impacted that child later on. Not a doctor, but I'm a brother of the victim. My mom has this belief that vaccines cause mental illness. She forbid us to go to the doctor, and 6 weeks later my sister got sick and died from measles. I am now as distant from my own mom now. Not a doctor yet, but a med school student. A fellow student of mine is very happy about not being completely vaccinated. She is also happy that our country, Germany, is still a free country considering vaccination, since she believes that they don't really work. At this point, I'd like to remind you that she is a medical student, and at least once a year, we have to have a medical checkup to make sure our mandatory vaccinations are in order, simply because we're studying and working at a hospital with a lot of immunocompromised patients. Anyway, she was happy to inform me that she only got the vaccinations that were absolutely mandatory. So she got no tetanus shot, for example, and she believes she will never get tetanus, simply because she doesn't want to, and she believes that is enough, since our minds are so capable of healing our bodies if we let them go free. For example, by using hallucinogenic drugs. Luckily that can only harm her and no others. I'm really not a bad person, but I kind of hope she cuts her foot on a rusty nail and gets a little bit of tetanus. Nothing that will kill her or in any way have a lasting effect on her, besides maybe convincing her that vaccinations work. I really don't want her to become a doctor. I had a kid come in that was super sick, 3 years old and in septic shock. He had the flu and another compounded viral infection, or maybe pertussis. Heart rate was close to 200, respiratory rate in the 50s, blood pressure in the 70s. Kid was so freaking dry that we could barely get IVs into him and I almost had to drill an IO. We dumped a ton of fluids into him, started him on vasopressors and transferred him to the local children's hospital. I had asked the mom if he was vaccinated and she said no. Vaccines have really bad side effects. They'll make you sick. I explained to her that not getting the vaccines had made her kid 10 times sicker than he ever would have been from any mild vaccine reaction. She told me I was a freaking moron and that I obviously have no clue what I'm talking, and that's the reason her kid was getting transferred. She also told me that recommending she vaccinate her kids was racist. For anyone not familiar with the jargon, an IO is an intraosseous line. That means the thing goes inside your bone to deliver fluids. I have the opposite of what you're expecting to hear, I assume. As a medical student, I went to see a young child, 1 year, in the outpatient clinic before the attending. The child was due for vaccines, and I talked to the parents about getting them on that day. The parents said they had reservations about them, so I talked to them about their reservations. We talked about all of the things they had read on the internet, and walked through each point one by one. One of the benefits of being the medical student is that you have nothing but time. I explained how vaccines are made and how they work. They don't have the mercury preservative they once did. Some vaccines are live but attenuated and others are immunogenic sequences bound to a protein. And why we get so many so early. That's when you're most likely to be affected by these diseases. They were concerned about the effects of so many vaccines at once. This is a common concern. But we challenge your system less with a vaccine than you see walking around in the world every day, and about them making the child sick. Not possible with anything but a live vaccine, and that's why those are attenuated. They are such a small dose that a non-immunocompromised individual should have no problem with them, even though you might feel a little sick because we activate your immune system and that's how you feel when that happens. The whole discussion took probably half an hour, and then they decided to go forward with the vaccines. As it turns out, most people are just scared, and who can blame them? With all of the misinformation in the world, it's easy to see how parents get to that point. But they also are human, and when you sit and talk to them like the people that they are, intelligent and able to understand your points, they respond in a positive way. It's one of the moments in medical school that I reflect on frequently, especially when things are tough and I feel like being impatient with people. This is a great story. As a nurse, I see quite a few patients who are misinformed or simply haven't been educated on certain things. I had a mother bring her child to see me as a new patient. When I saw that he wasn't vaccinated, I asked my nurse why not, and she told me that the mother had a religious exemption. When I entered the room, I asked the mom what the religious exemption was, and she said, oh, well, when he was a baby he had a rash from the hepatitis B vaccine. I kindly told her that I couldn't care for her child because he was not only a risk to my staff, myself, but also to other patients in my office. She went off on me and ranted about how she cannot believe that every doctor's office that she calls refuses to treat her son because he isn't vaccinated, and that the only doctor in the county that will see him can't see him for almost 2 months. I kindly stopped her and said if I was one of a few that refused to treat your child, I would understand your frustration. But don't you think there's a message that not a single doctor in the entire county, save for one doctor who did some really questionable practices, think essential oils and stuff, will treat your kid? That maybe there's a valid reason behind it? Yeah, she definitely wasn't happy and left. Here in North Alabama, I know, it is surprising for us to have anything to brag about. No pediatricians will treat an unvaccinated kid. I heard from one of those anti-vax morons that she was driving almost 2 hours away to see one up near Nashville. These stories should be compiled, printed, and left in the waiting rooms of every OBGYN and pediatrician's office across the world. I had a 76-year-old anti-vax patient the other day, although not really a parent's story. Funnily enough, she came in for her flu vax and the conversation went like this while I was preparing to give it to her. They're injecting too many chemicals into people nowadays. Me. Confused. Do you want your flu shot then? No. I mean the children. Back in my day we all had measles and got over it. I think it's better for the body's immune system to handle it. Me. Actually, rates of deaths and complications from measles were much higher in the past compared to complications of vaccines. There's actually this video that explains it quite well, referring to the recent Kurzgesagt Act video. I despise those things. Computers. Televisions. I won't watch it. Me. Okay. Let's just agree to disagree. Just thought it was funny how she obviously wanted protection from the flu instead of letting her immune system do the job while criticizing childhood vaccinations, when kids obviously lack a fully developed immune system. Also, she obviously wasn't getting her info from any up-to-date sources given her disdain of TV computers, but I guess her gut feeling trumps my medical knowledge. My sister and I are both biomedical scientists. I study intellectual disability and autism-related disorders. My sister studies viruses. You could not ask for 2 more appropriately specialized people for this discussion. My sister-in-law is still anti-vax, and she is not a fan of us, lol. She's a nurse and a mom, so she thinks she knows better than the people whose literal job it is to be on the cutting edge of healthcare. If I try to disagree with the nonsense she pulls off Facebook, she insists she needs hard facts, not just opinions. If I offer her proof through well-sourced research, she's here for discussions, not research articles. Some people can't be reasoned with. Pediatrician. Me. I read in the chart you refuse the hepatitis B vaccine in the newborn nursery. Any particular reason? Mom. I wanted to wait and think about it more. My husband has hepatitis B, so it's not that bad, right? Me. Not a doctor, but my sil was very much on the fence about getting her daughter vaccinated. She's a smart and rational person, but it shocked me to hear. I had to come at her from an angle of compassion, and told her that I understood she wanted to do what was best for her daughter, and a lot of what she had seen on FB had made her scared and confused about what that right thing is. I had to explain why the vaccines causing autism was false, and how herd immunity works, especially with my niece in nursery. It worked, and she sold it to my niece that if she had the injections then they could go on holiday abroad. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.